Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the 7th episode of the story in which Naruto accomplished the impossible. You cannot stop the flow of time. Its will only rotates in one direction. A mere human cannot change that path. This story is from Dorsey. Please support him, her. She is also a digital artist, so please visit her profile. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. The warm beams of the afternoon sun stroked his skin like a tender lover, while the breeze playfully caught his golden locks, twisting, picking and tugging them childishly around his fine features. Uzumaki Naruto silently stood in front of an obsidian stone, his sight locked on the always shiny surface which already held hundreds of names. His blue orbs ran through the names carved into the stone, then unconsciously moved to other empty parts of the memorial that he knew would eventually be filled with familiar names if he failed. His eyes locked onto a particular point, where the black stone was spotted with copper-colored flecks and fine curves, the place where his father's and mother's names were or would be carved onto its surface. His hands locked harder onto the soft stem of the one single, pure white Madonna lily that he'd picked up from Inoichi's newly opened flower store. A half-smile appeared on his face when the image popped up of the surprised and confused interrogator while he had handed over the flower. He was sure he would receive questions later, but he didn't care this time. He wanted to do this and it had to be done. Naruto squeezed the stem one more time, before he placed it lightly in front of the memorial and gently stroked its cold surface with his hand unconsciously. His teeth painfully clenched together, while sorrow overwhelmed his mind. Kurama silently withdrew into the deepest part of his mind, leaving as much private space for his mourning as he could manage. The blonde teen silently mourned for people still alive or not even born yet, for people not aware of their own death. He mourned for his still living and breathing parents, for his friends, for his precious people, for the people of Konoha and the other nations, and for the countless nameless shinobi and civilians from all over the elemental countries who had given their lives for only one cause. To live free in a real world, to defeat Madara and the Jubi, to defend him. Naruto spirited away from Konoha and sunk deep into the ink-black abyss of his grief to mourn for the living for one last time. A lean figure stood above an unmoving and lifeless form on the ground, between unnatural forms. The chirping of thousands of birds slowly died down, while the blue glow slowly faded away from the corners and sides of the cube around them. Hokage Kakashi slowly shook his head and let out a long and weary breath, his silver locks following the movement, slowly swinging together with his head in the motion. He could only distantly feel as someone gently placed his hand on his shoulder and squeezed it reassuringly, trying to shake him from his stupor back to reality. "Sensei. Let's go." Kakashi slowly nodded with the last sane remains of his mind, showing that despite his blank look he acknowledged his voice. A piece of his heart and mind died once more, together with the shadow of his once teammate, as did a small amount of his own sanity. He had seen him die. Once. And now he had killed him once more. We have to get back. Now. The Jounin flinched and finally turned his head toward the source of the loud voice to face his student. The shadow of his memories darkened his eyes, and for a second, just for a brief second, he saw his own sensei in front of him. He felt Minato's gentle hands on his shoulders, he saw his blonde locks, his long white coat swinging behind him, instead of his student's. The apparition gently faded away, but one thing remained. The piercing azure orbs, identical to his once sensei's eyes, watching him with concern. Eyes, which were the last remains of his former team and maybe the last things that held together his sanity. They reminded him of every single one of his losses, his acts, his failures. However, now those eyes gave him more than just sorrow, guilt and painful memories. They gave him hope. They always gave him hope, pushing him to live and go further even when he was allowed only to watch him from the shadows, fearing that someone would connect the dots before he was able to defend himself. "Naruto. Let's get out of here." The blonde teen only nodded in response, determination shining in his blue eyes. Four weary and bloody forms appeared next to the three commanders of the allied shinobi forces. Their eyes ran over the battlefield, several of them wide from the loss of numbers. Others were forced by willpower to look calm and collected, belonging to shinobi whose hearts were hardened into stone by the years. Gaara frantically searched the fields, desperately looking for his people and his siblings. A long, relieved sigh left his tight chest, when he spotted two familiar forms far away, still fighting. A calm and commanding tone kicked him out from his own small word. Darui. Report. Rika Jessima, Uchiha Obito, the one known as Tobi, has been eliminated. Our forces are now fighting against the real Uchiha Madara and the Jubi. It seems that their forces are slowly falling. The sealing team is preparing an attempt to seal away the two of them in one attack. They need a lot of time to prepare. We have also suffered great losses in every division, more than half of our forces have fallen, and our headquarters, the young commander suddenly shut his mouth, looking for the words to describe their situation, but he found none that could even nearly do it justice. Two figures appeared beside them suddenly, and golden light illuminated weary and bloody faces all around them. A stunned blonde teen swung his head around, desperately looking for someone. His mouth moved to ask a question, though he already knew the answer. Where is the Godame? Where is Tsunodabakan? Four pairs of eyes glanced toward the blonde teen, but no one said a word. They just let the silence fall amongst them as an answer. A hand was placed onto Naruto's already trembling shoulder, but he immediately shook it off violently as soon as it made contact. His hands clenched into fists, his joints becoming white from the strain as he attempted to channel his growing despair somewhere. With an effort that rose above any normal human's, Naruto forced back the lump in his throat and the sting in his eyes. His now foggy azure pools moved toward the hard ground, but he couldn't find any reassurance in the blood-soaked soil. His hazy gaze found the only thing that stood out: a small green leaf. But it was frayed at the edge and not just one crimson stain dyed its surface. He tried, but no matter how much wanted to, he couldn't move his gaze from it. Naruto. She used the last remains of her strength to save us. She is gone. Gaara's voice was uncharacteristically soft, barely loud enough to be called a whisper, but the named boy shook his head violently, still trying to deny the truth with every fiber of his being. His eyes never let go of the small leaf. They were winning, but without Tsunade-bachan, his previous determination and hope for success was slowly starting to fade. It shouldn't be like this. He whispered into the heavy air. Brada. B limped toward the small team, eyeing his leader and his only remaining family member, dwelling on his bloody clothes and wounds without comment. The sounds of the nearby battle somehow became only a distant whisper as everybody retreated into his thoughts for a short, silent minute to salute the fallen. Uzumaki Naruto. Blonde locks followed his head's sudden movement as it swung toward a small, old man with a commanding voice, finally releasing the bloody leaf in front of his foot from his gaze. The Godame Hokage left an important message for you. A soft, proud smile appeared on the wrinkled face of the Tsuchikage. His features smoothed over, as did his wrinkles, and suddenly, he looked at least a decade younger. You are in charge. The soft smile became almost fatherly before the Tsuchikage continued. The four Kage have also agreed to the decision. Welcome to our lines, Rokudame Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato. Naruto's heart stopped beating for a moment. His lungs forgot to breathe and his blood froze in his veins as he was overwhelmed by pride and pure joy. Azure eyes trailed across the landscape slowly, taking in every sight, hovering on some spots where he knew his comrades laid, dead or wounded. His joy slowly disappeared as it was replaced by sorrow and maybe a hint, if only a small hint, of regret. Uzumaki Naruto, Konoha's #1 most unpredictable and noisiest ninja, proved one more time that he had earned his moniker. I decline. Silence fell among the people around the Kages and the commanders, while a sour smile appeared behind the dark blue mask of his teacher. "I'm not ready for the hat." "Not yet." The Kazekage stepped toward his first friend, his eyes soft. However, his usual calm expression never left his face. "You just proved that you are ready, my friend." Naruto made a sour smile, but he shook his head. The smile slowly melted into a wide and so familiar grin. "The Nanadame Hokage still sounds good, Dadabayo. But for the Rokadame we need someone else. Someone who is more suited to that title in this situation." His eyes traveled toward his sensei, who just stared back with his well-known uninterested and bored expression as always. An explosion shook the ground and all heads turned toward the battlefield, where an enormous tail met with the hard ground. "We should continue this after that thing is pounded into the ground," Kakashi stated calmly. A giant black ball formed in front of the enormous mouth of the 10-tailed beast. Black as the deepest abyss of space, but somehow still glowing with a murderous light. The landscape shook when the enormous attack made impact in the middle of the battlefield, sending hundreds of shinobi into the embrace of the death god in an instant. The moans and yelps of the dying echoed throughout the land, while, with another shake of the earth, a tail crashed next to a blonde teen, forcing him to dodge to the side. An unnatural roar echoed along the landscape. A single shadow clone appeared next to Naruto after he formed the familiar cross-like hand sign, and it immediately moved into a meditative stance to gather energy from the dying nature around them. The beast roared once more, and its claws flung in the opposite direction where a handful of shinobi had launched an attack to distract the monster, while the others prepared another distraction so that the sealing team, who waited patiently in the background, could launch into action when their time came. Shikamaru jumped next to the weary blonde teen, his eyes foggy from strain and suppressed emotions, but in the next moment he was collected again. "Naruto. When the sealing team takes action, lead and cover them. You've got 1 more minute to prepare." The blonde teen only nodded in response and sneaked a peek behind his shoulder to check on his clone. The familiar orange patterns had already formed around his eyes and the hair on his neck rose as the increasing amount of nature energy flowing toward his copy flew by his ear. The clone suddenly snapped his golden eyes open and immediately jumped toward the 2 young men to grab them. Their bodies flew helplessly across the battlefield as the copy threw them to safety. Nature's energy hit him as soon as his clone dispersed inside the hell of flames, together with the sealing team, where they had stood not even a second ago with Shikamaru. The memories of his clone appeared inside his head, his guilt, his struggle, and his final decision to save them instead the others, all while they were still flying through midair. A heavy breath left Naruto when the air was forced out from his lungs as his body connected with the hard soil. They finally stopped after plowing a long scar into the hard ground. The place they had previously stood disappeared inside the inferno of an enormous, flaming sphere. The young blonde shinobi jumped to his feet in an instant, ignoring the stabbing pain in his left thigh. A sharp wooden shard stuck out from his muscles, painting red lines all over his orange pants until his blood dripped onto the hard ground to mix with the sea of blood already forming on the battlefield. A small, almost invisible stream twisted between small rocks to meet with another puddle of the red liquid only steps from him, where not even an hour ago he'd placed down the body of his friend who had once been so blinded by destiny. Weary azure orbs traveled toward the body of Hyuga Niji, then moved to the side and locked onto the body of another comrade. Her dark blue hair was stained with dirt and blood, but the small smile was still frozen on her gentle face. Fortunately her eyes were closed. He wouldn't have been able to endure this for another second if he had seen the emptiness in her eyes. He had only just accepted her feelings, had just made a promise half an hour ago that he would take her on a date and they would go out for a ramen when all of this was finished. He was weary and tired. He just wanted to lay down and sleep, and hopefully wake up from this nightmare. Actually, he wasn't just simply tired. He felt dead. Everything went slowly downhill since the 4 Kage appeared. Everything. And since he declined to become the Rokadame. The temptation rose inside his chest for a split second, to just let it be, just let the Uchiha do what he wants, let him erase the memories of the war, let him cast the genjutsu, let him bring the false dream world where everybody is alive. His hands clenched into fists, unconsciously looking for the heat that had been there only an hour ago, when Hinata had been holding his hand until her last breath, never releasing him, not even for a second. The temptation immediately disappeared and was replaced with guilt, squeezing his stomach into a small tight ball. How could he even think about the possibility for a second? Give up? He can't give up. With willpower greater than a normal human, he forced his head to finally turn and release the sight of Hinata's already cooling body. His eyes met with the shocked and wide orbs of his genius classmate, and in that 1 second he saw a hint of raw panic in Shikamaru's obsidian black eyes. No. Without the sealing Team Madara. The Nara flung his gaze toward the battle, the panic disappearing and replaced with calculation. Naruto could almost hear as the gears turned and thoughts and plans ran inside his head with insane speed. The young Jounin squeezed his eyes shut for a long moment, before he nodded to himself. Azure eyes locked with red and purple ones as the red glow slowly faded away from them. The golden flame slowly, almost motionlessly, disappeared from his body, while the wooden restraints squeezed him tighter, forcing out a painful hiss from his lips, along with his last remains of Kurama's chakra from his body. You have caused me a big headache. I have to admit this, Kyubi. But you've only managed to slow down my plans. The current ninja world will be destroyed and the infinite Tsukuyomi will be finished even without Obito. I already know how. This is the last time I'll say this. I won't let it. The words were pressed through his clenched teeth, but still sounded powerful and determined. You are injured and out of chakra. Even the Kyubi hasn't got the energy to heal you. Naruto closed his eyes for a second, to reach out for nature's energy, but his already overstrained muscles didn't stop trembling, no matter how desperately he tried to force them to stop. How long will it take, Kurama? I got a situation out here. I know. Hold on just a little bit longer. A sour, but still cocky smile appeared on his face. We haven't got that much time. The fox didn't answer. Just stay still and let me finish my plan, the Uchiha taunted. I'm a stubborn brat, you red-eyed moron. Madara suddenly stiffened and a wide, almost insane grin spread across his face. Finally, they are finished. A confused frown appeared on Naruto's face. Finished? Who? And what did they finish? Madara smirked. Let's just say, I played with some of our, very, very old friends. What are you talking about? The ancient Uchiha snorted, then instead of answering Naruto's question a smirk appeared on his face as he replied. Stalling for time? Good plan, however war is already mine. A wooden spear lashed from Madara's chest, aiming for the blonde. Naruto struggled inside his restraints, desperately trying to move out of the way, however the spear never reached him. A tentacle shot forward, deflecting the spear, which embedding itself into the hard soil behind the struggling teen. Byakan. Naruto. Don't give up. Bro is coming. The Kumo shinobi shouted, while the tentacle slowly moved back into his crouching body. Well, what do we have here? Wooden vines shot toward the heavily panting Kumo Jinchuriki, who didn't have the power to move. B stayed in his hunched position, overwhelmed by his exhaustion, while the wooden vines enclosed around his weary and bloody body without so much as a twitch of his finger. B's body screamed to move, to struggle, to shoot forward and tear away his restraints together with the enemy in front of him. However, in the deep abyss of his mind, he had already given up the fight. The blonde boy finally forced his weary body to stay still, forced his muscles to relax with the last bit of his logical mind, desperately reaching out for nature's energy. When the first flecks of orange appeared around his eyes, the wooden restraints blew into shreds, but before he could reach his comrade, Bee simply disappeared from sight inside a lazily swirling vortex. Naruto was already reaching out to tear away the wooden vines, but his hands met with empty space. A satisfied chuckle echoed behind him, and when he turned his head toward its source, his eyes met with the pleased expression on Madara's face. "I should thank you, Uzumaki Naruto. Without you, I wouldn't be able to capture the eight-tailed this easily. I'm grateful. However, should leave now. I have some important business with that present of yours. And a meeting with someone else." Madara started to run through hand signs. He didn't stop even for a second when Naruto sprung into action and shot toward the man, his fist already ready to meet his face. However, before it could happen, a satisfied half-smile appeared on Madara's face, then he and the Jubi simply disappeared from the battlefield. Naruto stared at the empty space in front of him for a long second, before he collapsed onto his knees. His brain shut down, forcing out every sound around him. His mind didn't work, his heart didn't beat, and his lungs didn't function, just like before. The yelps and moans around him didn't register in his mind. The soft hands of a pink-haired kunoichi on his shoulders didn't reach him. His eyes were still focused on the vacant area in front of him, where Madara had disappeared. Suddenly the shock wore off, and his eyes finally locked with Sakura's green orbs. After blinking rapidly to clear his foggy mind, muffled voices started to reach his consciousness. "Naruto. What happened?" The Jubi simply disappeared. The blonde only shook his head as a response, but in the end, he managed to press out words from his lumped throat. He got B. Someone violently grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. His eyes locked with the Raikage's furious but also concerned eyes, forcing him to avert his gaze to escape from the stabbing and demanding glare. He was protecting me, and I am sorry." The Raikage slowly released his shoulders and walked farther from the small group, while his voice echoed around them. "The remains of our forces are heading back to Wind Country. That is the nearest place, and it will be our new temporary headquarters. We will talk there, Uzumaki Naruto." Naruto sank down into the soft golden sand to watch the fading light on the horizon. The world around him seemed to burn with orange, gold and brilliant red flames as the setting sun's last beams reached the surface with the waving hot air. A soft, but burning hot breeze ruffled his golden locks, picking up the small grains of sand, mixing it with his hair, hiding them under his clothes. But it still felt pleasant and peaceful instead of irritating. With small movements of his toes, he dug his foot deep inside the golden sand, enjoying the feeling with closed eyes as it encompassed him, flowing between his toes. His mind drifted back to the last week, to the fight between them and Madara. His troubled thoughts wandered to a scene where he had sensed something so unnerving it made his heart ache. He had sensed him. He had sensed Sasuke in sage mode, but only for a short minute before his presence had faded away somewhere in Yuzu, as if he had disappeared from the earth. That had been the last time. Since then it didn't matter how hard he tried, something masked his presence from his senses. The blonde gritted his teeth. He also sensed one more very familiar and disturbing presence. But that was impossible. He hoped it was impossible. It couldn't be that Orochimaru was alive. The Edo Tensei had been broken. Only Madara stayed with the living, and it couldn't be that the snake had become that powerful, could it? The soft ruffle of clothes in the background didn't kick him out from his musing. "You left the village." After a long silent minute, Naruto finally opened his eyes to meet with the stabbing emerald green orbs of Gaara. "I'm just outside of the village walls by a meter. You want to scold me again just like yesterday on the balcony? I get it. I won't leave." The Kazekage didn't answer, just averted his gaze to watch the sunset together with his friend. "Why did you decline the title?" Naruto only shrugged and didn't answer for long, silent minutes, in the hope that Gaara would simply forget his question if he ignored him long enough. It worked for quite a while before the Kazekage spoke again. So? The blonde teen let out a long sigh and rubbed his eyes. There goes his plan. I'm not strong enough or wise enough for that title. Not yet. I was a fool, I thought it would be easy. My goals have changed. I have changed. But, it's not enough. I need to become stronger. I need to become smarter. I need to catch up with Dad. Konoha's next Hokage can't be a moron like me. The Kazekage watched him with a still, stoic expression for a long, silent minute before he opened his mouth. You are stronger than any of the Kages. You can motivate people, you can give them hope. Yes, you can act like an idiot, yes, maybe you are not mature enough for that position, and yes, you always act before you think, but you have friends around you, who will help you, who can support you and lead you to the right direction. You are definitely a good leader. You were always fighting not only for the sake of Konoha, but for all of us, even before the alliance formed. For all Shinobi. You should be by our side, where Tsunade once stood. So many of them died. I made so many promises that in the end I can't and will never be able to fulfill. How could I lead them? Don't throw away your dreams for the sake of a lost soul who doesn't want to come out from the darkness. It hasn't been about him for a long time. I know what I have to do with him. Naruto muttered his answer. He knew perfectly well who Gaara was referring to even without a name. Then what? You were always shouting that you wouldn't die before you became Hokage. That was your final goal. Did you give up? Did you give up your dreams? Naruto didn't avert his gaze, nor answer for a second. It's not that. I still want to become Hokage. But my reasons have changed. When I was small I wanted to become Hokage so people would acknowledge me. Itachi was right. I already earned that acknowledgement. But I don't feel prepared for what I have to do. The war. This war made me realize a lot of things. That I can't save everyone. That I can't think anymore about life like I did before. If I become Hokage, maybe I would be the one who'd send my comrades to their death. I'm not wise enough for that. His gaze drifted back to the horizon, his mind empty and his expression blank. Gaara let out a sigh and soft sand reached out for Naruto's hitayat, loosening the tufted black stripes and let it fall into his lap, while Naruto glanced at his friend with a surprised expression. But its place on his forehead was almost immediately replaced with a new forehead protector, one kanji shining proudly in the middle of it, Shinobi. When you think your time has come, when you think you are ready to wear the hat, you can replace your hitayat with your old one. Until that time, you are a shinobi of the allied forces. Naruto watched silently as his friend left, before he turned toward the setting sun again, and his hand tightened around the somehow still cold metal plate, which, not a minute ago, was proudly fastened onto his forehead. An enormous explosion shook the world. Dust and debris flew across the landscape as the blast of air picked up those who didn't have enough chakra, speed, or simple strength to properly stick themselves to the ground. An animalistic, gruesome roar echoed in the air, the voice of something definitely not from this world. With enormous speed and power, another tail swung and smashed into the ground with the sound and force of an explosion. The remains of the allied shinobi forces desperately struggled to stop the destruction and gain enough time to evacuate the civilians in the distance from Sunagakure no Sato, where they had taken shelter after the first battle with Madara for a short, peaceful week. Naruto. Retreat and leave with the civilians. The Godame Kazekage arrived at the head of the giant toad boss, jumping down from a small sand cloud. His face was bloody, his hair was a mess, dust and small cuts covered his clothes and skin. I won't leave you behind. There is still a chance to set it back without Madara here. We only have to deal with the Jubi alone. Naruto. You are exhausted and our forces are almost gone. The rest of the Kages are gone. We've only a handful of the force with Temari and a fraction of the 2nd and 4th division. There is no chance for us, but you must survive. The young Kage shouted out with despair. I won't leave my comrades behind. I will never leave this battlefield, Dadabayo. I am the Godame Kazekage and the regimental commander of the allied shinobi forces. You are a shinobi of it. I command you to retreat. No. The blonde's answer was simple and demanding, his voice lacked any of his previous anger. Naruto. You saved me. You saved my sanity. My soul and my body countless times. Gaara's voice was now soft and kind without any trace of his own previous fury and irritation. Gaara, Naruto. The Kage interrupted, his voice still soft, almost whispering, but it was more than enough for the blonde to shut his mouth. You always ask everybody to believe in you. Now I am the one who is asking you as a friend. Naruto, have faith in us. Please. Go and save yourself. Naruto's eyes flicked to the side. He couldn't stand to meet his friend's eyes, which had always sparkled with power but now looked back at him pleadingly. I won't leave you. Naruto's equally soft and caring voice encompassed their bodies, suppressing the noise of the enormous battle around them. The commander watched him for a long moment with an emotionless face again. I see. In that case, I have one last order for you as the regimental commander of the allied shinobi forces. And a last wish as your friend. Naruto nodded, then a sudden pain reached his weary mind from where his neck connected his skull. Live and get stronger, Hokage-sama. The world slowly faded away from his vision. The last thing he saw was the Godame Kazekage's form standing above him with a sad smile on his face. A small amount of sand slowly whirled back to the giant guard on his back, before he descended into the darkness of unconsciousness. That was the last time he saw him. A slumped figure stood in the thickening rain, gently stroking a giant stone spike, carved by skillful hands into the hard mountainside. Freezing cold rain drops flowed freely down Naruto's face, stabbing his skin like ice needles, mixing with his own warm but silent tears. Darkened eyes ran over the landscape of the empty lands, where 2 days ago Konoha and her people lived their lives inside the slowly growing number of buildings since Pain's attack. However, that which Nagato failed to destroy, the Jubi had finished with just one well-aimed Bijidama during their last fight for Suna. With one leap, he hopped down onto the hard surface, ignoring the pain in his ankles. At least it proved that he wasn't dreaming. However, deep down he really hoped that it was all just a nightmare and that he would wake up in his old apartment. His orbs moved toward the only memorial of his village, the giant mountain with 5 faces carved into its hard surface. An enormous crack ran through the faces of the first and second leader, while the lower half of Sarutobi's face simply disappeared. Maybe he was selfish, but he was still glad that, by some miracle, his father's and Tsunade's faces were untouched by the destruction. Naruto slowly shook his head, and he could feel a crack running through the surface of his own heart. He thought he had developed a sixth sense, that he would feel if something was happening to his beloved village. But he felt nothing when the black ball impacted with the center of the village. He didn't even notice it during the fight, that Konohagakure no Sato was no more, while they fought for Sunagakure no Sato. Nothing left behind. No debris, no ruins, no broken beams, no half-collapsed building, nothing. But thankfully there were also no dead bodies of friends and civilians like on the first battlefield or at Suna. The village hidden in the leaves and most of her people had disappeared from the world's surface silently. Gamakichi, bring me back please. Naruto's soft whisper filled the empty land around them. The orange toad didn't answer, only nodded, and the 2 figures disappeared from the empty land with a loud puff. The wall shook from impact and a long crack appeared where Naruto's fist connected with it. Dilated crimson-red eyes flamed with an unreadable emotion while they took in what remained of the allied shinobi forces filling the grounds of Mount Myaboku. Some of them were on the verge of life and death, while others sat without even a scratch, some eyes burned with pure hatred or determination, while others simply stared unfocused into the nothingness in front of them. How many? His voice was weak and cracking, while Sakura stepped next to him. Maybe 2,000 or 3,000. But thankfully not everyone is here. Some civilians managed to flee from Konoha before the Bijudama strike after they heard what had happened to Suna, and some of them had left even before the real fight started. We still have smaller forces here and there beside the survivors from the last battle. Maybe another 1,000. We have around 600 shinobi from Konoha here, the rest are from the other nations. Madara, he knows what he is doing. First he separated the mind, the headquarters, then the sealing team, then Konoha and Suna to dismiss the backup. The other 3 hidden villages already evacuated just for safety's sake. Most of the civilians dissolved throughout the lands in small groups. Naruto clenched his hands into fists, his nails painfully cutting into the soft flesh of his palm. Sakura let out a weary sigh after sending a concerned look to her teammate. Naruto? The blonde simply shook his head. Prepare the new headquarters with Shikamaru, Darui and Kakashi. Pa will help you. He won't be able to find us here for a long time. And you? A sad smile appeared on Naruto's face, but his eyes flamed with a new determination. I got an order from Gaara. With this, he simply turned around and left. 2 men occupied the small clearing, their forms gracefully standing amongst the giant plants of Mount Myaboku. The 2 shinobi suddenly launched toward each other, their movement blurred by their insane speed. Fists connected with palms, rough hits were gracefully swept to the side by a single sweep of an arm. The intense spar continued for an hour, before Naruto almost collapsed on the soft grass of the clearing after a last series of well-aimed Juken strikes. The heavy breathing of the blonde boy filled the clearing, while the Hyuga clan head gave a helping hand for the Jinchuriki to get up. You are still too hot-headed. Your attacks become sloppy when you lose self-control. A half-smile appeared on Naruto's fine features. He raised his hand to scratch the back of his head sheepishly, but it collapsed back to his side halfway. In the end the teen shrugged. Hayashi let out a weary sigh and pressed his fingers to several parts on Naruto's arm to reopen the closed tenketsu points. That's enough for today. Naruto shook his head, his eyes flashing with determination and sheer stubbornness. Not yet. I can take more. The collected Hyuga rubbed the bridge of his nose and swept the sweat from his forehead, then in the end just nodded. The 2 figures jumped backwards immediately, their bodies moving to stance unconsciously before they shot forward once more. Kakashi-sensei. I know you don't like to talk about it, but could you tell me more about Dad and the others? I know almost nothing about your past. About your team. I want to understand why he did it. I want to understand what happened to Obito, and I want to hear more about my parents. The silver-haired Jounin closed his eye and didn't answer. They sat side by side in the afternoon breeze under the shadow of an other-world plant in the shore of a meadow, enjoying the sounds of nature around them. Naruto shifted nervously and winced, and the movement awakened the pain in his muscles due to his previous training session with Raitun. After 5 minutes in complete silence, Kakashi finally opened his eye and turned his head toward the cerulean blue sky. I met your father for the first time when I graduated from the academy. He stood at the gates, waiting for me. Black silhouettes stood around a giant table. The new headquarters was filled with the remaining allied shinobi forces. Naruto simply leaned back against the wall, his arms were buried deep inside his pockets, almost perfectly mimicking the common habit of his sensei. His eyes were closed, but his ear was sharp enough to pick up the soft ruffle of the map on the table, the argument amongst the shinobi, the twitch in their heartbeat. The smell of the fresh ink they used to mark spots on the large map in front of them. It was irritating. Naruto let out a sigh and escaped from the cascade of senses into his own mindscape. He stepped inside the seal, while his eyes ran over the drastically changing environment with amusement. The sewer was slowly starting to transform. The dark water had disappeared 2 weeks ago, and he could already see some green spots all over the landscape. Osier trees germinated in the middle, while the pipes were slowly shrouded by a thick jungle of ivy. When I opened the seal, you didn't mention this little side effect, Kurama. The fox shrugged in his mindscape. You don't like the new design? Naruto shook his head. No, it's nice. I'm actually talking about my senses. It's annoying. Deal with it. You should be happy with your sharpened senses. I can't even sleep because of them. You will get used to it in time. Don't complain like a sissy. A furious snort left Naruto's real mouth, and he distantly felt a hand on his shoulder, forcing him out from his mindscape just in time, before he could sink in a deep argument with his fluffy tenant. He opened his eyes and glanced to the side to meet the questioning look on Sakura's face. Nothing, just speaking with the furball. Sakura made a nervous smile and settled down next to the blonde boy. I will never get used to it. Naruto shrugged. He is a nice guy, when he's not threatening to tear open my stomach if I do something stupid. Old habits die hard, I think. I would be more concerned about him if he suddenly started to act like a cute puppy. Yeah. A nervous chuckle left Sakura's soft lips. If I can get your attention back there. The irritated voice of Darui reached them and, to Sakura's surprise, they finally moved toward the giant table without any complaint. Naruto. You will lead the first wave with Kitsuchi. The second will be Kakashi's, the third will be me. Suddenly a small toad appeared in the middle of the table, gaining everyone's attention in the room. They spotted him near the remains of Konoha. Darui only nodded, and the small toad immediately hopped down from the desk and left without any further word. It's time for a strike. Shikamaru tapped Naruto's shoulder. Naruto, I need to speak with Kurama. I have an idea for him. Naruto nodded, and in the next second a shadow clone appeared beside him. His azure blue eyes shifted to crimson red, and his features became more animalistic. Come on. Just a little bit more. The blonde teen desperately tried to concentrate fire chakra into his palms, mixing it together with the already small whirling cyclone, together with 3 clones. Boss, it's going to. Before the clone next to him could finish the sentence, the technique broke down, and glowing orange flames grabbed the skin on his hands, stretching around the blonde teen and the environment, destroying everything around them. The storm of fire and razor-sharp wind finally died down around him, leaving only the smoke from the destruction mixed with the chakra-filled smoke of the dispersed clones. He heard a desperate yell and muffled footsteps as someone ran toward him, numbed by the pain from his burned arm. The pain started to die down, the burning sensation replaced with cool, green medical chakra. The blonde finally glanced up to his companion, looking deep inside the angry green eyes. Idiot! You could have killed yourself with that jutsu. The blonde teen didn't answer, he just let her finish what she had already started. 5 minutes later, he straightened himself despite the continuous opposition of the pink-haired girl. Thank you, Sakura. It would be safer if you get away from here. You don't think that I'll let you continue, do you? You've been out here for 12 hours and you almost burned your hands to coal. The only answer she received was a determined glance from azure eyes. Hundreds of clones popped into existence with the same determination, and the pink-haired Kunoichi backed under a giant tree without a word, after a last sad glance into the flaming blue pools. Uzumaki Naruto lay on his back, his eyes focused on the cerulean sky, with its puffy clouds. It had been 2 months since they made their last attempt to seal away the rogue Uchiha and the 10-tailed beast. The Shinobi alliance was slowly breaking, only a handful of ninja stayed together, fighting, and then withdrawing, then fighting again against the terror that showed up from time to time together with Madara, who was still looking for him to capture and gain the final nail to the coffin for the Shinobi world and the truth. Thank Kami, the 10-tailed beast hadn't been sealed inside Madara yet. Without Obito, and with his body being dead, Madara couldn't seal it away. All he could do was summon and control it. That was the only thing restraining Madara and slowing him down. He needed time, and this was their only help against the Uchiha. While he was searching for a way to seal away the beast and also hunting for him, they could act in the shadows and prepare their next attack. But if he figured out a way, found a sealing method which was able to restrain the unstable chakra of the incomplete 10-tailed beast inside his dead body, if that happened they were doomed. The Eye of the Moon plan would succeed, and then the infinite Tsukuyomi would draw everyone into a false world. The blonde teen slammed his fist into the soft soil next to his body. He let out a sigh and raised his hands in front of his head, focusing a small amount of chakra into his thumbs, and watched with an emotionless face as the electricity jumped from finger to finger with a soft chirping. Every offensive attack they used had almost no effect on the 10-tailed beast. Sheer power and stamina weren't enough to take down that monster, and Naruto learned it the hard way. He had spent time on learning other elements to take down that thing, had learned and developed powerful techniques that could easily wipe out a whole village at full power, furthermore combining them with the attacks of Kurama, but it wasn't enough. They just slowed them down for a short period. Nothing was enough against that thing. It didn't matter how many times they killed that damn bastard, thanks to the impure world resurrection he came back like nothing had happened. Madara wasn't a fool, and he knew perfectly well how they could get rid of him. During the first battle, he had taken care of that threat after he erased the command center. He had chased down the sealing teams one by one. They had lost the rare seal masters from Kyumo, 2 from IWA, and all from Suna in a blink of an eye by only one powerful attack. The only way was to seal it away, together with Madara. But that damn Uchiha could counter their every remaining sealing method. None of them were powerful enough to contain that amount of power, and those could be used against him couldn't work. Because of the complexity of the preparations. The last 2 shinobi from the sealing teams were just users who couldn't develop anything new on their own. There were no more real seal masters left. Naruto ran his fingers along the edge of the giant scroll, which he used as a pillow. He had found it an hour ago, deep in the Toad's library. Maybe it could help them. He let out a defeated sigh, grabbed the scroll and left the shore without a word, when he felt another presence invading his musing. After Naruto left, a lonely figure stepped out from the edge of the otherworld plants, with a worried frown on his face. Sai shook his head and gathered chakra into his limbs to catch up with his teammate. I can't stand this silence. Why hasn't he shown himself since the last attack? That was 2 months ago. Naruto slammed his fist onto the hard table, causing his friends to flinch. Naruto! Ino barked out from behind the table, where she rested her head on her folded arms. She glanced toward Sakura, who only shrugged as a response. What? Naruto turned around and folded his arms in front of his chest, sulking and grimacing like a small kid. The blonde girl only rolled his eyes in irritation. Just when I really started to think you were maturing. Naruto narrowed his eyes and stuck his tongue out toward the girl, but didn't respond. Shikamaru observed his friend for a long silent minute, his obsidian eyes narrowed with concern when he noted the dark circles around the hazed and darkened blue orbs. You didn't sleep yesterday, do you? The blonde boy let out a weary sigh and turned toward the Nara. No. I'm working on something. On what? On a new seal. Sakura made a curious glance toward her teammate. Another barrier? Naruto shook his head. No. Not this time. Then what? Ino had lost her patience and just simply barked out, which reminded everybody of a long-lost comrade and his dog. A small, sad smile appeared on Naruto's face, and it slowly transformed into a wide grin, which sent a cold shiver down Sakura's spine. It had been a long time since she last saw that grin. That fake grin of his. That's a surprise. Naruto turned around and simply left the room without further explanation, but his mask immediately disappeared when he turned his back to his comrades and his foot crossed the doorstep. "Sorry everyone," he whispered into the dark night with a weary and weak voice, but his once hazed and darkened eyes sparkled with new light of determination. "Tomorrow it will be over. I promise." Only fiery determination showed in the azure eyes of the young boy. "And I don't go back on my word. That is my Nindo. You can trust me. You know that, don't you?" The girl just nodded. "I told you that I'll break the cycle of hatred. I'll break this curse. If there is such a thing as peace, I'll find it. Believe in me. This is my legacy that they left for me." The girl didn't reply. Instead, a small sob escaped from her mouth as she leaned nearer to the boy's chest for comfort. "You were always like this, you idiot. You don't have to do everything alone. We're here too. You don't owe the world anything. Don't bear such a burden alone." "I'm not doing it alone, Dadabayo. You are here with me. You will always be with me, it doesn't matter what's happening. Just like Erosenin is with me, Tsunade, my parents, all my friends, my comrades." It was their decision. Ino and the others knew what they were planning. It was a foolish plan, Shikamaru should have known that. Naruto murmured, his eyes moved toward the motionless body of Ino. She had tried to control Madara during their last battle. His eyes didn't move for long minutes and he averted his gaze only when he felt Sakura grip his clothes tight, to glance down to the eyes of his teammate. "Promise me, you won't do anything stupid." A small smile appeared on Naruto's face, but it was slowly washed away when Sakura's eyes practically pleaded with him. "Promise me." The blonde eyed the girl for a long silent minute then nodded. "I promise." Sakura nodded and leaned closer into the warm embrace, and in minutes, she drifted into a dreamless sleep, overwhelmed by her exhaustion. Naruto gently picked up the sleeping girl and placed his teammate into the next empty room. Naruto watched the sleeping Sakura for minutes, maybe for hours. He didn't know exactly. His hands gently stroked out a pink tuft from her face, and then he leaned closer, his lips stopping only millimeters from her ears. "I'm sorry, Sakura. I'm going to break my promise. Take care." Naruto straightened himself and after one last glance he left the room. His steps echoed in the empty passageway, his face was emotionless, only his eyes sparkled with an odd light, while he opened his own room's door and grabbed a small scroll from his desk. He suddenly stiffened. "You are the only one who can still sneak up on me since I got Kurama's senses." Spiky silver locks unfolded from the shadows of a corner, slowly revealing his silhouette centimeter by centimeter as Kakashi slowly walked toward the blonde teen, his hands buried casually inside his pockets. The Jounin didn't speak for a long silent minute, only his visible eye shined with an odd sparkle while he observed the young boy in front of him. A small smile appeared under the textile of his mask when he realized that he didn't have to tilt his head down as much as back then to look into the eyes of his student. "You got taller." A small smile appeared on Naruto's face, but he didn't answer. He surpassed the urge to retort with something harsh. The commander measured his once student from head to toe once more and he had to restrain a flinch when he suddenly realized why he looked so different this time. The azure orbs shined with a different flame, a flame that he saw first in the eyes of his own late sensei, when he last saw him on the night before Naruto's birth. Preparing for the worst-case scenario. Dozens of scrolls laid on the floor, already checked, though he still leaned above the last small scroll, memorizing its use in the knowledge of what was going to happen if he used it. What he was going to sacrifice if everything went wrong. He had the same eyes as the time Minato mentally prepared for his death just in case something went wrong. The Jounin's chest squeezed painfully when his eye moved toward the small scroll in Naruto's hand. The whole situation was painfully familiar. Kakashi's lips were suddenly drier than the deserts of Suna in a blink of an eye, and his voice cracked as he whispered. "I know what you are up to, Naruto." The blonde's muscles tensed, but he didn't move from his place. "You want to stop me?" The Jounin shrugged casually and took a step closer and gently freed the small scroll from his student's fingers. However, he actually wanted to scream at him, to just forget his stupid plan. He wanted to punch him in the face to beat some intelligence into his thick head or knock the blonde out to stop him and take his place. However, he didn't do any of that. He instead slowly rolled the small scroll open, and took a closer look at the painfully familiar design. "Would anyone be able to stop you?" A half-smile appeared on Naruto's face as he simply grabbed the scroll out of his sensei's hands and buried it deep into his cloak's pocket. "No. I thought that technique perished together with Konoha," Kakashi whispered. "I remade it from my own seal." "And you've modified the design?" "Yes. I have been working on this for a long time. I finished it yesterday, but if I had known what they were up to, then Naruto gathered his thoughts and emotions, and hardened his face. "This form will allow me to use it even if I'm a Jinchuriki. Will it be enough? To restrain both of them? Back then it was only able to contain half of the Kyuubi's power. It will, but only with Kurama's power boost. He will be able to slip out from the seal before." Naruto shook his head, and then simply continued listing the facts, which oddly calmed him down. "This is the only seal which is capable of it. With the modifications, it acts like a seal tag and not like a ninjutsu as the original technique. The effect will be immediate. And I am the only one who can use it, before you think about something stupid, like trying to knock me out and take my place." A long, weary sigh left Kakashi's lips, muffled by the cloth of his mask, heating his skin under it. "I've always wished you would follow your father's footsteps, but not in a way like this." Kakashi slowly shook his head and they stayed in silence for a long soundless minute, enjoying each other's company in the small room and the gently leaking symphony of the cicadas, crickets, and the fauna. "Why are you here, sensei? Will you try to convince me not to do it?" Kakashi stepped closer and gentle hands squeezed Naruto's shoulders reassuringly. The edges were rough by the years of fighting, but it still felt softer against his tense muscles than anything he could currently think of. It wasn't a real hug, but it felt even more to the blonde from his restrained teacher. "Nope. You are as stubborn as your father and your mother. You won't listen. I just hope I could make a proper farewell this time. Rokudame Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato. Kakashi sensei." "Yes? Don't call me that I'm not." The Jounin closed his eyes, for a long moment, before his eyes turned into a familiar form, hinting at the wide smile under his mask. "I decline." Naruto let out a sigh, then with a soft chuckle he turned around to leave. He feared that if he looked at his teacher once more, his determination would crack, but the temptation was too big to bear and he still glanced back, for one final look. His chest tightened and he lurched back to give one last quick hug to his stunned teacher. Kakashi, first a little hesitantly then warmly, returned it until Naruto took a step back and made a few small steps toward the door. "Sensei." His voice was so soft, but still serious, and the smile under Kakashi's mask melted away. "Yes? I leave Sasuke to you. Tell him that I'm sorry that I couldn't keep my promise. And tell the others that I'm sorry, and take care. And to never give up. All of you live a happy life. And go find a girl. Have a family. Have lots of children running around in creepy masks. Rebuild Konoha and her pride. Let the will of fire burn again in peace." Hatake Kakashi stood silently, listening to the last words of his student, and when he finished, he made the deepest bow he could manage, and his always collected voice trembled for a moment before it echoed back to him inside the small room. "I will, Hokage-sama." He glanced up a moment later in the hope to meet with those azure eyes one more time, but his student was already gone. Naruto glanced at the other side of the valley from the head of the Shodame, while the waterfall shined with a cold silver glow by the full moon above them. He had sucked in a long breath, freezing his chakra flow for a moment, before he pushed out a huge amount of Kurama's chakra toward the distant lands. He ran through a long chain of hand signs and rolled open a scroll made from fine vellum. With a puff of smoke, a hitayat appeared on the ink-black design on its surface, together with a worn thick orange-colored diary, a copy of Jiraiya's first book and several other belongings of Uzumaki Naruto he held dear. He gently sealed each of the things back into the scroll, after his fingers stroked the surface of a few photographs, silly things like a pressed leaf from Konoha, or the last remaining pieces of Tsunade's necklace. The last memorials of long-gone comrades, friends. One last attempt to say goodbye to their memories. When he finished, only one thing remained in his lap. The proud insignia of Konoha glinted in the faint moonlight as he traced a finger gently on the curves of his old hitayat. Naruto looked around and let out a long sigh. His eyes squeezed shut, his teeth clenched, before he finally shook his head. The blonde put the hitayat back on the fine surface and in the next second, it was gone, sealed away again, then put the scroll into one of his pockets. And now what? I already sent out the invitation. He will come. We just have to wait. Are you really sure about this? There must be another way. I'm sure. You will be able to leave my body before I pay the necessary price. Everything depends on your timing. I won't let you die with me. Kurama didn't answer. He'd been oddly silent in the last few days, while they had been traveling to their destination. He forced the fox to promise him that he would escape before the Shinigami strikes. He couldn't endure the loss of one more friend. He settled himself down and his eyes slowly closed to gather as many energy from the untouched nature around him as he could. You have finally given up? Naruto opened his eyes to reveal his golden orbs with horizontal pupils and glanced toward the Uchiha standing on top of his own stone head, whose expression mirrored the same lack of emotion on the stone replica's face. He tilted his head to the side, observing the calm man in front of him for a long silent moment with curiosity. Why do you think I've given up? The Uchiha folded his arms in front of his chest. You are here. Alone. Either you have given up or you still think after almost 6 months of useless battle that you are able to win against me. A wide, cheeky grin appeared on Naruto's face. The latter, Databeo. You've chosen an almost sentimental location. It's fitting. Don't you think? Because this time, you will really die here. You won't even be able to make a scratch on me. Naruto let out a snort and shook his head, but the Uchiha didn't wait for his answer. Madara's form was colored with a golden shade when he gracefully landed in front of Naruto, whose form was already overwhelmed by the golden flames of pure chakra. The giant form of the Susanoo emerged around the Uchiha in the next second, deflecting the attack coming from Naruto in the next blink of an eye. The battle was enormous. Jutsu scarred and shook the landscape around them, just like almost 100 years ago. New mountains rose from an earth release by Madara, while one of Naruto's wind releases cut a new canyon into the ground, diverting the ancient old river to a new direction under their feet. If any living thing was nearby, they would see that despite how hard Naruto struggled to win, the Uchiha simply played with him. It didn't matter how hard he trained, how strong he became. The Uchiha was always a step ahead. Naruto dropped himself to the ground on one knee, and only his heavy breathing could be heard over the scarred lands, while he tightened his grip on the newest enormous wound in his stomach. His golden locks hung freely from his crown. He had lost his hitayat long ago. It laid somewhere near, maybe shrouded by debris. I'm impressed. A normal shinobi would already be unconscious after that wound. But it's still useless. You can't win against me. You are wounded and exhausted, while I'm still untouched. Naruto felt his left eye twitch in his irritation and an unconscious snarl left his lips as he straightened himself one more time. His hand shot forward and released a kunai toward the Uchiha, sharpened with wind chakra, who didn't even bother to duck in his arrogance at seeing the small attempt. He just simply tilted his head to the side, to let the kunai pass. A satisfied smile spread across Naruto's face when the chakra-covered blade suddenly stretched out, drawing a thin red line on the Uchiha's arrogant face. The smile grew into an animalistic grin when the first droplets of crimson liquid slowly flowed down his chin and dropped to the ground with an unnaturally loud splash. "Ha! Take that." His only answer was an irritated glare from the man in front of him. "Are you ready for a ball? 10 more seconds and we'll have the necessary amount of chakra." Naruto raised his hand to the side, not bothering with the enormous wound on his stomach and the countless cuts and bruises all over his body. A warm sensation filled his insides while his chakra slowly flowed into his palm and a shining electric blue globe appeared in it. His other hand was buried into his pocket, his fingers clenched around the scroll, staining it with his own blood. "Then this is farewell Kurama. Don't forget the right timing. Uzumaki Naruto." "Yeah. It was honor to fight with you." Kurama's voice was oddly weak, almost trembling. The almighty nine-tailed demon fox became sentimental. "I'm touched." Nothing else could be heard inside his head. Kurama didn't answer, but it wasn't necessary. He felt no regret, no sorrow, no sadness and no despair like anybody else would when he was about to offer himself willingly to the death god. He wondered if maybe his father also felt like this before he had done the sealing. The thought of his father filled his mind with happiness. An odd and childish curiosity raised inside his chest. What would the belly of the Shinigami look like? Will he be able to see his father? See Gigi? Suddenly unfitting happiness and joy filled his chest, while his thoughts wandered toward his friends, his family, his comrades, toward all of the people he cared for. "It was an honor for me also. Take care Kurama." He let out a long breath, his mind emptied, his breath and heartbeat slowed down. Only one emotion burned inside his head, flaming with blinding light inside his eyes. Sheer determination. A soft smile had appeared on his face. The aching of his wounds, the soreness of his muscles, the sharp pain in his abdomen became distant and dull. "I'm sorry everyone, take care." A soft breeze ruffled his blonde locks, picking up small leaves and dust from the scarred ground, dancing around his body, gently stroking his skin one last time, before carrying away the leaves together with his last words toward distant lands. Unearthly peace encompassed his mind and his soul, like after a warm caring embrace only which a parent could give to his child. Without thinking, he shot forward with insane speed, gathering all of his own remaining chakra into his feet, and slammed the whirling azure blue Rasengan toward the Uchiha's chest, while his experienced fingers broke the closing seal on the scroll, before the world around him became black. "You eat like every meal will be your last one." Naruto only shrugged in response and took another bite. Kushina dropped another piece of meat onto his plate, and Naruto tucked in, unaware of the blue eyes fixed on his frame as he demolished the meat in 3 bites. The blonde teen let out a satisfied sigh and patted his rounding stomach, leaning back with closed eyes. "Much better now," mumbled the young blonde. "Hey Toraku." Naruto sneaked a peek from the corner of one opened eye, showing that he was listening. "I met with Inoichi and he told me something." Naruto didn't move from his relaxed seat, nor did he react visibly, however a small hint of worry started to rise inside his chest. He had prepared in advance for this. "What did you do with that lily?" The teen only shrugged and stayed silent for a long minute before he gathered himself to answer. "I brought it to the memorial stone." The Hokage tilted his head a little. His eyes mirrored only curiosity and fortunately not suspicion. But it was Kushina who asked the question that had instantly popped up in the Hokage's head. "Why?" Kushina's voice was full with curiosity and confusion as it echoed in the empty dining room of the Hokage mansion. The teen only shrugged, his face oddly unreadable. When he had visited the memorial stone, he had mourned for his lost friends. But right now, they were all they would stay that way even if he had to go through hell for them. There was no more need for mourning. They were breathing, living or growing inside their mother's tummy. He would never forget them. He would never forget everything they had done for him. He shifted nervously on the floor, then suddenly hopped onto his feet, grabbed a paintbrush, and threw it at his father with a cheeky smile in an attempt to change the subject. Lunch break is over. And don't forget, I want my room in orange. It wasn't a fair win. You still can't do it without your clones, Minato complained. Naruto shrugged and moved to the side to lean against the kitchen counter. I learned it, didn't I? And it works. So I won. Minato's frustrated snort echoed inside the empty dining room, and he straightened himself from the floor and grabbed the bucket of the vibrant orange paint with angry, narrowed eyes. Kushina. Remind me in the future to never, ever make a bet with Toraku again. Laughter filled the room in the next second, and the Hokage couldn't help himself. After a short second of silent sulking he joined in, his annoyance instantly melting away when Naruto's warm laugh surpassed everyone's voice. However, Minato's blue eyes traveled toward his brother from time to time. A worried look appeared on the face of the Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato as he leaned over a scroll and tapped his chin continuously with the soft brush. He hummed, lost in thought, then let out a sigh. That was the moment when another blond man appeared in the open window, sticking his golden head inside the Hokage tower. His mouth was open to speak, but when he caught sight of the worried look on his father's face, he simply closed it and hopped down in front of his leader, eyeing him for a long silent moment with tilted head. I don't like that expression on your face. Minato just waved a hand and leaned back against his carved chair to fix his eyes on the ceiling. Just some village business. Naruto raised a curious eyebrow, his eyes fixed on Minato, who in the end finally opened his mouth to speak. We are having trouble with the ranking process. During the war, we made on-field promotions, but we still have potential genin who need to be tested. We need to hold a chunin selection, but we don't have enough genin for a proper assessment. I'm afraid they'll have to wait one more year until more students graduate from the academy and gain the necessary experience to participate. A small chuckle left Naruto's mouth, earning a pointed look from his father. This is a serious problem, you know. This could reduce morale amongst the genin. Naruto waved a hand dismissively. I don't think so. Let's just resurrect an old practice. Invite the other nations and you will get enough participants. I'm sure the Kazekage will be eager to send some teams to show off their skills to the Wind Daimyo. Minato tilted his head a little, observing his younger brother for a long moment with an unreadable expression on his face. You think Anoki and the Raikage will just send genin teams to Konoha when we've just won a war against them? Normally it would be years until the first shared exam. Maybe even a decade or more. Naruto only shrugged. Who knows? Invite all 5 Kage as well. I'm sure all of the villages are in the processes of regrouping and restoration, so all of them need extra income. They'll have to demonstrate their power if they are to get new customers, and the best time for that is a good old chunin exam where clients are gathered in one place. Naruto casually explained his point, whispering a silent thank you to Sarutobi who had explained the exam's real purpose to him. It would open so many possibilities if the 5 Kage met in this timeline. The idea is good even if it came from you, but I would absolutely argue with the timing, low profile, you know, low profile. Naruto sent a mental shrug toward his never-missing companion, earning an irritated groan from Kurama. The time traveler locked eyes with ones of identical color, looking for any hint to the thoughts behind those blue orbs. In the end, Minato only shrugged and made a contemplative face. It was years before the Third Shinobi War since we've last held a proper chunin exam, that is true. And maybe having one now would bring the younger generations closer together. However, I'm worried about the other nations. Most of them hold a grudge against Konoha, and that could pose a high risk to the village. However, maybe, you know what? I'll consider it. A wide and satisfied grin appeared on Naruto's face. Success. Naruto glanced down at the scroll in his hands after sending another suspicious glance toward his father. He was wearing that cunning grin again, and he couldn't help but worry about the thing in his hands. He moved his gaze downward and started to scrutinize the closed scroll with wary eyes, like it could attack him or bite off his hands at any moment. What is this? Your next assignment. It will be a long-term mission. 3 months long to be exact. Naruto raised an eyebrow and slowly rolled the scroll open, running his eyes over its content. When his brain finally processed the contents, his eyes widened and his mouth fell open, his mind already desperately starting to look for excuses he could use, but only Kakashi's silly ones came to mind. Kurama's snicker echoed inside his mind. That's going to be interesting. We reap as we sow, isn't that right, Naruto? No way in hell I'm going to accept this mission. The sly grin remained on the leader's face. It's your choice. This, or D-ranked missions for an equivalent time period. Naruto narrowed his eyes dangerously, his mind jumping between anger and disbelief. That's blackmailing, Dadabayo. Sarutobi Hiruzen's soft chuckle filled the room in the next second as he looked at his successor with an amused expression on his face. Indeed, that is blackmailing Minato-kun. The yellow flash only shrugged and leaned back in his seat confidently. This or D-ranked missions. It's not blackmailing. I'm simply giving you 2 options to choose from. Naruto slowly shook his head in his defeat and an almost animalistic groan left his mouth as he burrowed his face in his palms. His voice was muffled by his hands, but it still cracked with irritation. I hate you. The Hokage only shrugged again and a satisfied smirk appeared on his face. Then it's decided. Welcome to the ranks of the Chunin exam supervisors. The first 2 months is mostly about preparations and diplomacy. That won't fully occupy your time, so you will still receive other missions during this period until the exam starts. I hate you. Naruto mumbled onto the fine paper as he rested his forehead on the long letter he had just finished writing inside the Hokage office. That had been the last invitation letter, thankfully, which would be sent to the Tsuchikage by a small delegation tomorrow morning. You are going to mess up the ink, and then you'll have to start over. An irritated groan left Naruto's mouth and he finally straightened himself, revealing a small ink smudge on his nose. A soft chuckle filled the room immediately, and Minato pointed toward his own nose to show that he had been right. Naruto rubbed his stained nose hard with narrowed eyes, continuously mumbling curses toward his father. Don't you have a secretary for these kind of things? I do, but her calligraphy by no means matches your skill. Naruto rolled his eyes, but a small amount of pride formed inside his chest at the compliment. He did work hard on ingraining those damn symbols into his fine motor muscles for countless hours. Okay, it wasn't him, mostly his clones, but still. Receiving the memories of over 1,000 boring hours was, for him, equal to a torture session with Ibiki. His mind traveled back to the events at Kusa, and a frown crawled on his face. He hadn't gotten any information about Kitsuchi since they had returned from Suna. His blue orbs flashed with concern and he hesitantly turned toward Minato. Who will bring the invitation to the Tsuchikage? Minato didn't look up from the paper stack in front of him as he answered. You want to know when I will free Kitsuchi, don't you? Well, yes. He will leave tomorrow morning, together with the other delegations. I thought it would be a sign of goodwill if he was the one to hand over the invitation. A satisfied smile appeared on Naruto's face as his only answer. Hey Kitsuchi Ajizan. A blonde teen jumped into the circle of ANBU around the 4 foreign shinobi, earning some irritated glances from the already tense guards and surprised looks from the IWA fighters. The named giant narrowed his eyes, observing the newcomer with a frown on his face while the kunoichi next to him couldn't restrain her trembling muscles, shaking with fury and the urge to attack. The commander raised his arm in front of the woman and stepped in front of Naruto. What do you want? The teen locked his hands behind his neck and a bright smile appeared on his face. Nothing, I just came to say goodbye. The kunoichi raised an eyebrow and shouted. Why the hell would you do that? To show you are superior? Naruto furrowed a confused brow. Superior? Why would I do that? The kunoichi let out a furious snort, her eyes still flamed with hatred, but a glance from her commander immediately silenced her. What do you want, Todoroki Toraku? A wide grin appeared on the teen's face as he stepped closer and raised his right hand toward the stunned commander and halted it in midair. Kitsuchi narrowed his eyes, observing the offered hand for a long silent minute, waiting for the boy to finally drop it, but his eyes mirrored only determination and nothing more. His hand moved almost unconsciously toward the outstretched hand, but paused before they could make contact. Why are you doing this? We kidnapped you. We tried to kill you. Naruto only shrugged, his hand never moving from its place. What's past is past, you can't change it, but you can try to build something better for the future. Suddenly an amused expression appeared on his face, like he was stunned by a joke that only he could understand. His expression finally settled on his face as a soft smile. So, will you fall with me? Will you be the next to fall in the domino chain? The commander eyed him for another long, silent and tense second as he remembered distant conversations about dominoes and change, but an amused snort left his mouth in response as he finally grabbed the hand in front of him to finally shake it. You really are insane. A cheeky smile appeared on Naruto's face as an obvious answer. Yes, he is. Insane and suffering from a serious hero complex. Naruto turned his head to send an annoyed look toward the slowly approaching Minato. The Hokage stepped inside the circle and nodded toward the commander, who mimicked his greeting with a cold expression. Kitsuki-san, here is the invitation letter we were talking about. Despite what happened before, we are still looking forward to seeing Genin from IWA part in the exams. The commander only nodded again and turned around to finally leave the village after an almost 1 month-long stay in its hospitality. They stepped through the gates, together with the ANBU squad who would escort them until they reached the borders. An unconscious sigh of relief left his mouth when they were finally far enough from the gates. A cheerful yelp still reached them from behind. See you later at the Chunin exams. And don't forget to bring Onakajiji with you. Onakajiji? The kunoichi raised an amused eyebrow and glanced back to the still waving teen. Interesting shinobi, isn't he? Kitsuchi's deep voice forced the woman out from her thoughts as she nodded her answer unconsciously, before her mind drifted back to the teen. Naruto leaned over a blank scroll, stretching out his arms in front of him. He grabbed a small jug and a kunai to mix his blood with the black ink for a new barrier seal he was about to do. He made a small slice on one of his thumbs and raised it above the jug to let blood flow freely into it, but after one small crimson droplet, the flow suddenly stopped. Naruto frowned and repeated the process, but the small cut was almost immediately gone as soon as the blade left his thumb. The blonde let out an irritated groan, and sank into his mindscape to face the snickering fox. You've got a very wicked sense of humor. Stop healing me. Another animalistic snicker echoed inside his mindscape, and he was pushed out from it by a small flick of an enormous rolled his eyes while repeating the process again only to gain just another drop of his crimson red blood before the small cut disappeared from his thumb. Naruto exploded in the middle of his room. Forgetting himself, he shouted out a long loud oath, mustering his entire colorful vocabulary. He was on the verge of tearing out his own shiny golden locks, when the door swung open and a concerned-looking redhead peeked inside the room. The blond boy froze between two words and scratched his cheek in his embarrassment. Sorry, I accidentally kicked the table. Kushina only slowly shook her head and rolled her eyes, the ruby-red locks following her movement gracefully in the air. Geez, You are a shinobi who manages to leave without a scratch from a spar with Minato, and you are going to limp for a day because the table attacked you. Naruto only made an annoyed shrug and watched as his mother shook her head one more time before closing the door behind herself. The blonde teen let out a weary sigh and sat down next to the named table once again. One more prank like this and I will arrange a karaoke night in my mindscape just for you. Naruto couldn't see, but he still felt as Kurama grimaced and winced in his mindscape. I'm bored. Occupy yourself as you always do, don't let me work. What are you doing anyway? You already made at least a dozen barrier tags. I'm doing this so we don't have to worry over people seeing us training. It will mask your chakra so we can train together. So, you will let me out? Only if you let me finish it. If anyone recognizes your chakra, we'll be in big trouble. A wide smirk appeared on the fox's face. That will be fun. I'm going to tear you into small pieces. Naruto rolled his eyes. Their relationship had morphed into something you could call a real friendship, but Kurama was still the nine-tailed demon fox, and sometimes his old personality broke through despite their new bond. Just like with Sasuke before the Chunin exam. They had gotten along very well, but he still behaved like a bastard sometimes. Naruto let out another weary sigh when the memory of his old friend popped up again in his head. Thoughts of him broke through the barrier he had made to barricade himself from his old life. During their first fight with the Jubi, he had sensed him near Konoha. He hadn't realized it during the battle, only when they had retreated to Suna. But when he started to look for his friend while in the desert, he couldn't find him anymore. As if he had disappeared from the face of the earth. He didn't think he was dead. He would never think that. Something or someone somehow locked him away from his Sannin mode, just like Madara had done this time and back then. Hey Kurama. Don't you think they are somehow connected? The fox narrowed his eyes while he thought about the possibilities. Maybe. The bijou shrugged and didn't make any other comment. He simply closed the conversation, and bedded himself under the trees to take a nap. You are a big help. Naruto let out a sigh, grabbed the kunai once more to finally start work on the seal, and slammed the invisible door close in front of the memories of his raven-haired teammate. Two shinobi stood straight and tense inside a large office, facing a short, almost childlike man, who read the scroll with an emotionless face. His eyes narrowed when he finished reading, and he finally moved his gaze toward the two ninja in front of him. Tell your Hokage that Kiri will participate in the exams. The leaf kunoichi nodded, acknowledging his answer and waited patiently for further words. I will attend the finals. A small satisfied smile appeared on the mostly stern face of the Kazekage. His gaze was fixed on the slowly whirling sand on the horizon, where the two shinobi from Leaf had departed an hour ago with his answer. He was more than glad to show Suna's growing strength to new clients and to the Wind Daimyo. The almost unnoticeable sound of rustling soft textile reached his ears, and his satisfied smile turned into a warm and caring one. His eyes immediately softened when his wife stepped inside the room with an unbelievably small sleeping baby in her arms. Karura slowly swept a small auburn tuft away from the small child's forehead, and the Kazekage's thoughts wandered toward a certain young blonde man. He silently whispered his gratitude into the soft wind of the desert in the hope that it would carry his thoughts to the land of fire. Old and wrinkled skin moved as the third Tsuchikage narrowed his eyes when he finished rereading the scroll his commander and relative had given him only minutes ago for the second time. Thoughts raced inside his head, looking for traps and opportunities. His old eyes moved toward Kitsuchi, who stood still in front of him, waiting for his order. Why on earth would IWA participate in this show-off? Kitsuchi tilted his head to the side, looking for an answer in his own mind, then in the end only shrugged. I don't think they intended this to be a show-off. They need more commissions, so does our village. If we don't participate, they will earn a great advantage by showing their forces to the clients. The leader raised an eyebrow and let out a doubtful and annoyed snort, but his mind already started to hover around new clients and a possibly larger income. I really think we should participate. Furthermore, I advise you to also attend the finals. A grimace appeared on the leader's wrinkled face. So be it. But there is no way I'm going to set a foot into Konoha unless it's for a direct invasion. Then please allow me to escort the genin teams. The Tsuchikage narrowed his eyes as he observed his companion suspiciously. Were you brainwashed or what? You hate those tree huggers. You were their captive for a month, and now you are telling me you want to go back. The commander stayed silent for a long moment before he finally answered. I really believe they are seeking peace with us and with the other nations. I was convinced of this during my captivity. I still hate them, but I want to make sure of something for myself. Kitsuchi's eyes became foggy and unfocused, his thoughts wandering toward a certain blonde shinobi, while his leader observed him with narrowed eyes. Make sure about what? The commander hesitated again before he eventually gave his answer. That I have the courage to forgive and to fall. The leader raised a curious eyebrow. Forgive whom? Konoha? They won the war, should we forgive them? Why should you of all people forgive them? We will win the next war and we will wipe out their existence from even the history books. Kitsuchi slowly shook his head, an unreadable expression appearing on his mostly stern features. In war, there are no winners. Only survivors. The Tsuchikage narrowed his wrinkled eyes and watched silently as his commander left the room without any further words. A furious snort echoed all around the room as an enormous chakra spike sent shivers down the attendants' spines. Two shinobi with a leaf hitayat shifted on their legs uncomfortably while a muscular man clenched his right hand until his joints became white, restraining himself with every nerve not to smash something in his annoyance. So Leaf wants to demonstrate power? So be it. Tell your Hokage that Kyumo will participate. One of the Leaf shinobi nodded, and after a hesitant moment he opened his mouth. We are glad you accepted the offer, Raikage-sama. Konohagakure no Sato and Yondaima-sama are also hoping for your personal attendance during the finals. The shinobi made a deep bow, not aware that the Kage's eye twitched with irritation. The Kage opened his mouth to speak, but a voice behind him interrupted his effort. Is the young man very similar to your Hokage still alive? The Leaf shinobi slowly and hesitantly spoke after he shared a quick glance with his companion. Yes, Bisama. Torakusan is very much alive. A wide and satisfied grin appeared on the man's face behind the raikage. Great. I want to speak with him. The raikage narrowed his eyes, observing the man who was his brother in every way but blood next to him for a long silent second. And you think I will let you go there alone, B? His only answer was a grin from the Jinchuriki. Minato narrowed his eyes when he reached a giant glowing purple barrier, blocking their sight and senses from the inside while Kakashi jumped down next to him from a branch. Where is Jiraiya? Kakashi shrugged. He mentioned something about research before he left. The Hokage rolled his azure eyes, and examined the barrier with increased curiosity. How long has he been inside? For 2 hours, sensei. He didn't let me in. He said he wanted to try something big. The Hokage narrowed his eyes and stepped closer to the barrier. When his experienced hands reached its surface and channeled some chakra into the closing seal, the purple barrier didn't disappear or let him in like he first thought it would. Minato frowned and made a wondering face, but in the end he only shrugged, and a cheeky smile ran across his features before he disappeared with a flash of his golden locks. Naruto let out a long breath with closed eyes, before he opened them slowly and glanced toward his opponent opposite him inside the barrier, observing his actions calmly. The clone with shining red eyes, dilated pupils and widened whisker marks on his cheeks stiffened when his opponent's eyes transformed into a shade of gold, his pupils altered, but without the orange markings around his eyes. 2 clones popped into existence next to him. The clone currently controlled by Kurama grinned, his canines sticking out under his lips, twisting his face into a feral expression. Naruto grimaced at his own animalistic image, and nodded toward the clones beside him. Chakra gathered inside his hand while the other clones started to mix their own chakra into the jutsu. The Rasengan in his palm first shined with an orange light from the fire chakra, before almost immediately brightening into blinding pure white when the wind chakra also mixed into the whirling orb. It didn't change the form, this time he only manipulated the nature of chakra he mixed into it. The two clones disappeared when they finished their jobs. Naruto felt a tug outside the barrier, but he had already started moving. It was too late to stop now. In the next blink, he threw the chakra ball toward the still grinning clone at the other side of the barrier-enclosed space, but his eyes widened with shock when another figure appeared behind the suddenly frozen Kurama. Minato's eyes widened when he turned his head and was faced with an attack sweeping right toward his head only a meter away, overwhelming his vision and his other senses. By pure instinct he immediately grabbed the clone, a split second before the ball of chakra exploded and the two figures disappeared inside the burning inferno. A smoking man landed harshly behind Naruto's back with a loud moan, together with the still stunned Kurama, but the clone dispersed as soon as it made connection with the hard soil, filling the air with smoke. A relieved sigh left Naruto, together with the last remains of nature chakra, before he finally turned around to face with his panting father sitting on the ground, his eyes still wide, staring in front of himself with a blank expression, his body overwhelmed by the sudden rush of adrenaline. Minato slowly gathered himself and rose from the ground to send a pointed and very angry glare toward Naruto. The purple barrier suddenly wobbled and vanished like it had never been there. Kakashi slowly shook his head and let out a long sigh, then jogged into the center, where two blondes loudly argued over something, the edge of the Hokage's white robe still smoking a little. "Are you out of your mind? You could have blown everything up. It was your own damn fault. You were the one who just appeared right in the middle of the attack behind my shadow clone. Did you even think about why I might have put up that damn barrier?" A small hint of panic leaked from his voice when a dangerous snarl and a proper amount of killing intent left the Hokage, freezing Naruto in his movement. However, the feeling was gone in the next moment as the yellow flash shook off his sudden anger. What the hell was that anyway? A frown appeared on Minato's face when he touched his scorched, half-missing right eyebrow. "That was a two-element combo I'm currently working on." Naruto shifted his gaze to observe his scorched eyebrow and burst out laughing. "Hey! Nice new design. I'm sure your fangirls will love that." A muffled chuckle escaped behind Kakashi's masked mouth when his one visible eye also locked on the remains of his once teacher's eyebrow. Expression disappeared from Minato's face in the next second before he folded his arms in front of his chest. He watched the hysterically laughing teen and narrowed his eyes when he noticed the restrained laugh of his student. Dranked missions for the next week. It was too much for Kakashi, seeing Naruto's sudden change in expression. He burst out with a barking snicker at the Chunin's wide eyes and gaping mouth, but the Hokage's stern voice and emotionless face directed at him immediately froze the laugh inside his body. "You too, Sensei. But I didn't do anything." A cocky smile spread across the Kage's face as he shrugged off the complaint and the childish whining of his always collected student. "You were laughing." Minato glanced toward his still gaping other blonde companion with a cold expression. "Toraku. Briefing about the exam in 3 hours, in my office. Be there." With this last stern and emotionless statement, the Hokage disappeared from the field with a flash of his golden locks, leaving behind nothing other than two still shocked and gaping teens. Naruto's eyes were locked onto the spot where his father had disappeared from for a long silent minute, before his limbs slowly started to tremble, his eyes narrowing until only small slits were visible from his azure blue eyes, and he shouted out, "This means war, you got that? Like he can hear you." Kakashi muttered under his breath, his arms folded across his chest. Naruto gripped the arm of the Jounin and dragged him away from the clearing, continuously mumbling something incoherent, until he finally found his voice. You go and get pink paint. I'll go and get. The Jounin didn't listen, eventually succeeding in shrugging himself free from the blonde's grip and returning to his previous posture. No way in hell. I won't take part in this. Naruto raised an eyebrow while he leaned down to face the young Jounin. Are you a scaredy cat? Jounin Hatake Kakashi? What about your reputation? Are you just going to chicken out from this? The named teen narrowed his eyes, but in the end only nodded. If you do what I think you are planning to do, we will be doomed to D-rank missions for the rest of our lives and not for just a week thanks to you again. I won't participate. If you even touch his coat, he will skin you alive. Naruto folded his arms in front of his chest and turned away from his companion to silently sulk. Over his betrayer. Finally it was Kurama's voice inside his head that kicked him out from his thoughts of vengeance. Do you think he sensed me? Or your senjutsu? Naruto shook his head. I don't think so. He was too preoccupied with evading the attack. I didn't think someone would just teleport into the middle of the barrier. His stomach started to rumble, and a smile appeared on his face. I think we deserved some ramen after this training, don't you think, Kurama? The named fox only rolled his giant crimson eyes. The blonde Chunin moaned in his satisfaction as the hot soup slid down on his throat, warming up his body from the inside out until it reached even his toes. He picked up the pink fish cake with his chopstick and it disappeared into the endless pit that was his stomach with another groan, while the toad Sannin only rolled his eyes next to him. Ramen. The meal of gods, especially after a hard training session. It's easy to satisfy your needs, Gaki. One bowl of ramen and you're in heaven. Naruto sent a cheeky smile toward his teacher and turned back to his steaming bowl. Not like your needs are all that complicated either, you old pervert. Jiraiya snorted and turned toward the other end of the counter to continue trying to sneak a peek under a woman's clothes. There is nothing more satisfying than the sight of a perfectly curved female body. Yeah, especially if the named woman is blonde with big boobs, not to mention deadly. Naruto muttered between two bites. Fortunately Jiraiya was too preoccupied with the discreet flash of cleavage from the brunette at the other end of the counter. What was that? Nothing. Naruto muttered with a full mouth before he swallowed the last remains of his meal and stretched his arms behind his head. What will we do tomorrow? Jiraiya finally averted his eyes from the woman's chest to meet Naruto's. Minato told me something about drank missions for you and Kakashi, but I dismissed it. We'll get a day off. A relieved sigh left Naruto. Thank Kami that I didn't think he was being serious. What did you do to him? He didn't want to tell me. Naruto scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Let's just say that I burned his dignity a little bit. Jiraiya raised a curious eyebrow and waited for him to continue. He used his stupid Hiration to invade my barrier and he appeared behind my clone when I was trying out a new attack. I literally burned most of his right eyebrow off accidentally. Jiraiya burst out in a fit of laughter for a long while until he finally composed himself. A small shake-up never hurt anyone. Even the strongest person could be in trouble if he let his guard down in the wrong moment. A sour half-smile appeared on Naruto's face. Yeah. Jiraiya got up from his seat and tapped his shoulder. Come on Gaki, I've got some business. Will you accompany me? I want to finish some things before the briefing. Naruto nodded and followed the toad hermit along the streets of the village. He'd already figured out their destination. They'd used the same path 100 times when Jiraiya headed for some research at the bathhouses. A nostalgic feeling filled his chest. He had always enjoyed these moments with the old man, just walking beside each other silently, just the two of them. It always reminded him of the old times, when they wandered around Fire Country, in Konoha, or in any foreign city. Hey Gaki. Jiraiya's voice snapped him out from his musing, and only his reflexes prevented a new bruise on his cheek as he grabbed a scroll flying straight toward his face. "Hey! What the hell were you thinking?" The Sannin chuckled and waved a hand. "You seemed lost in your thoughts, so I thought I should shake you up a little. Couldn't you poke me instead or something?" Naruto's mumble died down suddenly when he realized what was in his hand. The soft surface of fine vellum rested inside his palm like a lover, and the unnoticeable amount of his own chakra pulsed faintly from inside the closing seals, together with the rhythm of his heartbeat. He glanced down at his hand, and his surprise melted into anger. "Explain. Now. You stole it." Naruto's voice was oddly imperious and commanding, something he gained during the Fourth Shinobi War. Strangely, Jiraiya immediately straightened himself unconsciously and opened his mouth to answer, but when he realized his actions after a moment, he instantly shook his head to ease away the urge to explain himself like he did something wrong, or he had to report something. It was odd. He sounded just like Minato. In the end, he only shrugged to dismiss his sudden guilt and started walking to break the tension. "Minato asked me to check it out for him, just after I had arrived. So I took it." Naruto frowned. That was almost 4 months ago. He had completely forgotten about his scroll. A soft, almost invisible smile appeared on his face when he traced his fingers along the edges of it, but it was almost immediately replaced with a troubled frown again. Jiraiya had stolen it from his cupboard where he had hidden it. Since that time, he hadn't even thought about it. Not even when they moved to the Hokage mansion. He was sure he couldn't open it now. If he got it back now, that could only mean one thing, but he had to be sure. "You couldn't open it either." More a statement than a question. Jiraiya only shrugged once more. "The first layer is a simple blood seal. Minato could probably open it, after all he is a close relative of you. That seal isn't so complicated that it could tell you apart from a very close relative." Naruto just stared back to his sensei, his previous raising anger immediately disappeared and he was now hanging on to his every word. He was about to receive some proper feedback about his work, and not just sheer and harsh critique like before on his barriers. The second layer required your own chakra signature, it's just a standard one. The third is much trickier. It requires some kind of manipulated chakra, an elemental chakra maybe, or a mixed one, but as with all of your seals, it's confusing. It reminds me of something, but... Jiraiya's sudden sharp glance stabbed him like a knife for a second, as if he was staring into his very soul. The third layer required Kurama's and his own mixed chakra. It couldn't be that he recognized it, could it? If he recognized it, we would be surrounded by ANBU and suppressor seals and not walking on the path, idiot. But what? Nothing, just a silly idea. Jiraiya only waved a hand dismissively. The fourth layer is another interesting one. The existence of a specified summoning contract. Jiraiya glanced at him once more, this time his eyes only shined with curiosity. "Have you tried to summon anything since you came here?" Naruto shook his head instantly as a reply, maybe a little bit too fast, while Jiraiya hummed in response with a wondering face. He hadn't tried it since he getting stuck in this timeline. If he had, and it was successful, there was no way he could explain how he was able to do that without signing the contract, and if it failed, he feared that the Toads would know that someone had tried a summoning. He didn't know enough about summoning contracts to risk it. Of course it would be useful if he could use the Toads, but the risk was too high. Based on the design, I would say the necessary contract should be the Toad contract. Naruto froze in place, his eyes bulging from his skull in an unnatural way. Shit. He didn't dare to blink or breathe, he just waited for Jiraiya to continue, and thankfully he didn't turn back to see his shocked face. When he finally did so, Naruto's mask of utter shock was replaced with real curiosity. "Well, this option is impossible, because I have the only existing Toad contract and it doesn't contain any new names." At this time, only Minato and I are toad summoners, nobody else. It's also impossible for you to have made one of your own. The toads assured me that they know their every summoner and they don't know you. But I would still say that your contract is very similar to my toad's. Jiraiya hummed again, lost in his thoughts, then he started walking again, a little slowly, waiting for him to catch up. He glanced back to Naruto, observing him curiously while he stated his next sentence. A kind of amphibian or reptile. A frog maybe, or a salamander. Something that likes the wet weather like rain, don't you think? Naruto only shrugged, not getting what he was referring to or what he wanted from him, and Jiraiya's disappointed expression didn't help him either. That didn't trigger anything, did it? Naruto made an odd grimace of perfect confusion, until he finally realized what his once teacher was mumbling about. You mean those déjà vu feelings? No, nothing like that. Jiraiya let out a sigh and scratched his crown in a way Naruto had seen countless times when Jiraiya was disappointed. It's a shame. Will you humor me? Jiraiya only ignored him and continued, making it obvious that he didn't want to reveal any of his thoughts or theories to him. The fifth layer Gaki, you were insane when you made that seal. Who the hell would put a trap on a closing seal? Naruto only raised an eyebrow as an answer, not trusting in his own voice. Minato told me that you also weren't able to recognize it. With none of your other knowledge damaged, it indicates that this seal has a meaning for you, something from your memories. But this trap seal that it was familiar to me. It took me a lot of effort to finally realize why. I saw it only once, a long time ago, on the main entrance of Mount Myaboku. Naruto just stared back at the Sannin with a blank expression on his face. He was beyond shocked. Too shocked to move his face muscles, and too shocked to suppress his emotions. He copied that trap exactly from that entrance. It would detect the intruder's will, and if he found anything malignant it would trigger. Jiraiya observed him with scrutinizing eyes. If it weren't impossible, I would say that you are a toad summoner, and that you've already visited Mount Myaboku. We are going to try out something. Your old perverted teacher is smarter than I gave him credit for. Naruto only nodded his head as an answer to both of them, his face fortunately still controlled from mirroring his shock. What do you want to try out? The hand signs are boar, dog, bird, monkey, ram. Bite your finger before you do it and smear some of your blood on your palms, and after the signs slam your hands onto the ground with an equal amount of chakra for 1 Kage Bunshin. Naruto just stared, exactly like he had in the last 10 minutes, while his mind froze for a second before it started to spin crazily from the upcoming panic. This is going to be interesting. Shut up and help me. Shit, what should I do? Naruto felt as the fox shrugged in his mindscape, and after a second of consideration he finally answered. Go with the flow. Hell if I know what will happen. It would be worse if you refuse to do so. If you manage to summon a toad we will confess. Naruto made a hesitant step backwards to gain some space, raised his hand slowly and took a long time to stare down at it. In the end he shrugged and shook off his rising panic. He sucked in a long breath, raised his thumb toward his pointed canine to make a small cut, and smeared the blood on his palm with the ease of an experienced summoner. Jiraiya observed his every action carefully. Every movement was automatic, and screamed experience even when he ran through the hand signs and slammed his palm onto the hard surface with enough force to push the necessary amount of chakra into the seal array, but not enough to bruise his flesh. His muscle memory was perfect on how to execute the technique to call a smaller summon. Naruto watched with a bated breath as the ink-black marking of the summoning technique spread across the ground like a spider web, the familiar pattern forcing a small smile on his face, before it all disappeared into a chakra-filled smoke. He didn't dare to blink, not even to let out the breath he had been holding in since he bit his thumb, waiting with muscles tense to their breaking point for the smoke to finally clear away. Everything seemed so slow now, the mere second it took for the smoke to clear feeling like an hour. Finally the air in his lungs left his chest together with a sigh as the smoke dispersed and he stared down at empty ground. He slowly glanced up toward his once-sensei, who was staring down at the spot where a toad should be, a grimace on his face. "Well, that is unexpected. Apparently your name was erased from the summoning contract." Jiraiya made one more disappointed scowl, before continuing, "It seems then your scroll will stay closed. I talked to Pa. He said that the seal on the entrance was developed by the first toad summoner, and that it could be that he passed this knowledge to someone. He moved to aim before he died." Jiraiya shrugged casually, then glanced up at the sun. "Anyway, I don't think it contains an attack or something dangerous. It's a fine piece, with intarsia and made from vellum, so I think it contains some personal stuff. I made a similar one when I was your age. I stored my precious materials and pictures in there." Naruto made a grimace. In both amusement and in disgust. He could only imagine what kind of precious materials and pictures Ero-sennin had when he was a teenager with rampaging hormones. But, he was right. He glanced down at his hand and squeezed the scroll a little bit, before burying it deep inside his pocket. It was Pa who had once told him about Jiraiya's old habit of storing his precious things in a special scroll. So he made one of his own to store his own precious things in. The last tangible remains and relics from his old life, pictures of old friends who'd survived the Fourth Shinobi War, were sealed inside the scroll. Some other photos, gathered from here and there, the high-tie he got from Irika, and finally, a thick orange notebook, containing pieces from his life, training plans, sketches of new seals, and it sometimes also functioned as a diary or a memoir. Or something along those lines, where he could extract his troubled thoughts during the long and sleepless nights. It was also something Pa suggested that he do. "I think you should take it back home. We've still got almost an hour before the briefing starts. We will meet there." Naruto only nodded, almost automatically, lost in his thoughts and still under the effects of the happenings before. He stepped into the office at the exact time Minato had ordered, his eyes wandering toward the audience sitting next to his father, the stoically puffing Sandaime, the grinning Jiraiya, the three personal advisors of the Hokage. He stepped next to a familiar shinobi after a bow toward them. Naruto grinned too. Makoto, dressed completely in black, and a smile forced its way onto the face of the middle-aged interrogator when their eyes met for a moment. "And now that the last of the main examiners has arrived, we can finally start the briefing." Naruto winced when his father's stern voice reached his ears, but when he turned and faced his father he had to mask the chuckle that threatened to explode from him with a cough as he noted the thin layer of chakra surrounding his seemingly now whole and shiny right eyebrow. A henge. Minato dangerously narrowed his eyes and Naruto immediately became silent. "Sorry." The Hokage nodded and turned his attention toward the others. "I have already received answers from every country. All of them will send teams, and it seems we can count on at least 40 genin squads." Someone cleared his throat, and Minato closed his eyes and let out a frustrated sigh before he turned toward the source with a straight face. "If you would like to make a comment, please feel free to share your thoughts with us. I already stated my point of view, but I will remind all of you once again. We are just out of war and you are risking the security of the village with this exam. Especially by entrusting a new recruit without any background information with this event." Naruto narrowed his eyes, but when he turned his head toward the man, eyeing his appearance curiously, he found that he didn't recognize him. But he didn't miss the old man's sharp glare toward him. Minato glanced back with an emotionless face and folded his fingers under his chin to rest his head on them. "I appreciate your concern for the village's welfare, Danzo-san, but the purpose of this meeting is to discuss the details of the exam. We have already decided that it will be transacted. Security will be strict and strengthened, every foreign genin team will receive at least one special jounin guard and the village representatives an ANBU." Naruto frowned. Danzo, the same Danzo who almost became the Rokudaime? Minato eyed the man for a second before he continued. As for who I have chosen as supervisor, that matter is not of your concern. I would like to remind you that you are my advisor. I can accept your advice, or I can disregard it. If you think this is a major problem, you could have introduced it to the General Council when you had the opportunity. But Konoha won't back out from it now. Naruto would find this small confrontation amusing if he weren't straining his mind to dig in his memories until he finally found what he was looking for. Shit, sigh, the root. It was so obvious now. The attack, the one who debilitated Minato from inside the walls. It was Danzo. Naruto buried himself into his own thoughts, cursing his own idiotic and dense brain for forgetting about that man. The dispute ended as fast as it started with a satisfied Minato, who kept an unreadable expression on his face while secretly moaning inside his mind at the sight of the twitching eye of the old war hawk. Then back to the business. The first and second round will last a total of 5 days. Those who fail either exam will leave the village immediately afterwards. The first part's supervisor will be our lead interrogator Kawamoto. Minato gestured toward the named Shinobi, who nodded and stepped forward to speak. Thank you, Hokage-sama. We will follow previous examples before the war. The first will be a written test, with a stressed decision-making situation, after information gathering and sharing. The Hokage nodded, not aware of his relative's riotous inner thoughts glued around Danzo. The second part's lead supervisor will be Orochimaruzen, who himself volunteered for this job. Minato gestured to his left, where the named Sannin emerged from the shadows like a ghost, and Naruto finally left his own troubled mind and clenched his hands in his rising anger. Anger toward the snake freak and anger toward himself, because he hadn't sensed his presence in advance. But now that the man stood almost in front of him, the disgusting smell of the reptile filling his whole nose. His troubled brain didn't process the meaning of his sentences when he started talking, even his voice was disgusting. It was dead, cold and slimy. He could feel as a small drop of sweat slowly ran down his spine when the slit amber eyes wandered toward him, shining with an odd sparkle which he absolutely did not like. He measured him like he was some kind of delicious food he was about to swallow whole after squeezing the life out of it. Naruto almost gagged when the tip of the long, pointed tongue sneakily trailed along his tooth behind the parted lips. His eyes locked, while the speech of the Hokage became only a distant noise. Supervisors will attend the second part, operate and interfere if necessary. I don't want any pointless deaths during the second ion of the exam. The nations already have enough war casualties and I don't want to increase these numbers. Several traps will be placed all around the forest by Toraku, who will also be the supervisor of the unknown fights. Minato gestured toward his brother, and frowned when he noted his trembling fists. He tracked his eyesight back to Orochimaru and concern rose inside his chest when he also realized the odd light in the amber eyes. However, he couldn't identify it, unlike the blonde Chunin. Naruto had already seen it in those creepy eyes. It was excitement and hunger for power. Toraku. Naruto flinched from the sudden raised voice and glanced toward his father with a confused face. Naruto. Pay attention. We will discuss everything later. Why wise? Prepare for a preliminary before the third round if necessary. We will have more participants than we first planned for. Naruto nodded. If there aren't any questions, then we are finished. The Hokage glanced around the room, and when nobody raised his voice he nodded. Then the briefing is over. Toraku, I want to have a word. With you. The attendees left the room after a bow or a short nod, or in Danzo's case without any motion or word. Minato turned toward the snake summoner one more time with an unreadable expression, observing the emotionless face and the odd glint in the eyes of the man. Countless questions rose inside his chest from that look. The Sannin's behavior of late was odd since Sarutobi nominated him as his successor and not his student. He became paranoid and more addicted to his research, sometimes he would barricade himself for days in the closed section of the library, and sometimes simply disappear from the village for days or even weeks. The Sannin finally averted his gaze from Minato's brother, and left the room along with everyone else after a small nod toward the Hokage. Only Toriku had stayed, his narrowed blue eyes following the back of the snake until he disappeared behind the entrance. Toriku. The blonde turned around to meet his father's eyes. Yes? Did you have a confrontation with Orochimaru? Naruto raised a questioning eyebrow. No. I didn't even talk to him. Why? Naruto felt as a droplet of sweat ran down his spine by the obvious lie. Well, actually it was just a half lie. He really hadn't even talked with the snake bastard in this timeline. Minato just nodded, closing the conversation by grabbing a paper from one of the trays in front of him. I hate when you do this. Minato raised an eyebrow, but didn't look up from his paperwork. Do what? Just once would you give me a straight answer? Only once in a lifetime and I will be satisfied. Minato let out a sigh and shook his head. Sorry, I can't talk about it. Naruto slowly shook his own head and folded his arms across his chest. His eyes wandered toward the hands of his father, his fingers around the fine brush, to distract himself. The tactic was successful. A frown appeared on his face in the next second. Did you propose to Kushina like you said you would? A satisfied smile replaced the frown when the Hokage winced at the question. I see. So the fearsome Yondaime Hokage, the yellow flash of Konoha, the one with the flea on sight command under his name in the bingo books, chickens out because of a girl. Minato winced over the paper one more time and let out a sigh. No, I am just waiting for a perfect opportunity. Naruto observed the man in front of him for a long silent second. I think you are just scared. Minato finally raised his head to look into the eyes of his brother, who almost made a step backward when he noted the odd sparkle in those eyes. Yes, I'm scared, but not because of the reasons you're thinking of. If I link her to me, I will be endangering her life. My enemies would target her, as they have already targeted you. Minato dug his face into his palms. I want to. I really want to. But just by wearing my name, Kushina will be in danger. What if I die and I left her with my surname? What if we have a child? What if my enemies go after my infant's life to have revenge against me? These questions just don't let me rest. They come up again and again. Naruto could almost see as worry radiated from his pores. So that is it. That is why I get my mother's surname. To protect me. Long after his death, he still looked after my life, he still gave me protection. He stepped next to his father, and his hand moved toward his shoulder almost unconsciously to give his reassurance. That won't happen. I won't let you die, nor will I let anyone harm Kushina, or your future children. We are family. We are here to protect each other. Under the name of Namikaze or not. But Kushina will wear the name with pride, and not with fear, so will your children in the future. She is a kunoichi and a damn good one. Don't act like an overprotective father. Minato stayed silent for a long second, and then finally glanced up to his brother when his soft voice one more time echoed inside the office. Don't be afraid, I will protect her. I promise. Todoroki Toriku never goes back on his word. Guilt rose inside his chest once again, together with yearning, forcing him to avert his gaze from his father. He missed his old name, so damn much he couldn't even describe it. He wanted to hear his name slip from his father's lips, he wanted to end all of this, to erase the enormous walls of lies which were slowly shrouding his existence. But for the sake of everything he considered dear to him, he couldn't be selfish. This time, he had to act from the shadows as a real shinobi even if that meant he had to erase his old self. Even if Uzumaki Naruto had to perish, together with his previous achievements, from the history books. But all of it would be worth it. If it meant that his loved ones would be safe, it was worth it. He could do it for a little longer. Only until he found that damn Uchiha. No more. Just until then. No. You are wrong. He snapped his head back to his father, confused, only to face his soft smile. It's Namikaze Toraku who never goes back on his word. Naruto stared back for a long silent second, his mind suddenly numb after it processed the words and his previous determination cracked. His lips parted to answer, but he instead nodded, unsure of his own voice. Namikaze. The name tickled inside his head for a long minute, talking down and overwhelming Kurama's voice at the back of his mind until his shocked face moved into a wide and proud smile. That was all he wanted in his childhood. That was what he craved for all those long, long years, to be a member of a real family. And now, in this surreal world where he finally received it from his own father, his joy and pride suddenly disappeared and was replaced with new emotions. He felt awkward, alien and guilty. The temptation rose again with unbearable force, together with his guilt, to confess everything. He locked away the voice of Kurama, echoing inside his consciousness. He locked out everything else from his surroundings. Only two things were crystal clear. The picture of his father with the soft smile on his face and the unbearable guilt inside his own chest, squeezing his heart painfully, his soul struggling continuously from the agony. His azure blue eyes had locked with identical ones, looking into his very soul for a long moment, increasing his struggle. He wanted to tell him everything. He wanted to tell him that he had already learned the Rasengan, that he had developed it further, that he had become strong like he wanted him to be. He wanted to see his father's eyes shining back at him proudly as he spoke his own name and not a false one. Kurama's angry voice was surpassed by the loud echo of his pounding heart. To hell with the consequences. His lips slowly parted, but his throat felt drier than the deserts around Suna. When his voice finally left his mouth it was weak and sore, almost unnoticeably faint, but it stabbed the silence around them unmercifully. His father eyed him curiously, waiting patiently for him to continue. I have toy want to tell. Naruto swallowed, to ease away the dryness of his throat, never letting go of his father's gaze, not even for a moment. I want to tell you something. He choked out finally. Minato sent him a small encouraging smile. What? Naruto swallowed again, a soft warm breath leaving his lips as his sweat-soaked hands clenched into fists from the tension gathering in his very soul. His lips parted one more time, to finally confess and to get rid of the unbearable pain inside his chest and the enormous burden he was carrying. But the moment was disturbed by a harsh knock on the door and the secretary stormed into the office before he could say anything. When she left the office only a minute later, the moment was already gone, as was the temptation. Sorry. What did you want to tell me? Naruto watched his father for a long silent minute, then in the end slowly shook his head and a soft smile appeared on his face. I just wanted to thank you. You can't imagine how much this means to me. His only answer was another soft and warm smile, while he desperately tried to block out Kurama's angry voice inside his head. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.